The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest room that Ambassador Wei had ever seen. It stretched upward for what seemed like forever, with platforms and seats carved into walls that glowed with soft blue light. Thousands of alien representatives sat in their designated places, watching as the human delegation walked through the main entrance. Moved slowly. Each step required effort. Her legs felt heavy and her back ached from standing straight. This was not because she was tired or sick. This was simply what it meant to be human. Around her, she could hear the sounds that passed for laughter among the alien species. The delegates, beings made of living crystal, chimed and rang like wind chimes in a storm. The massive clouds of intelligent gas rippled with colors that had learned meant amusement. Even the insect-like and clicked their mandibles in a way that needed no translation. They were laughing at the humans. They always laughed at the humans. "Look at them," whispered High Counselor N to his aide. His four arms gestured toward the human delegation. "See how they struggle. Their own planet tries to crush them with every step, and still they dare to walk among the stars." The aide clicked in agreement. "One full gravity," he said, as if describing something obscene. "Can you imagine evolving under such conditions? It is a wonder they developed intelligence at all." Pretended not to hear. She had learned to pretend many things since humanity first made contact with the galactic community 5 years ago. She pretended not to notice the looks of pity. She pretended not to care about the jokes told behind her back. She pretended that the constant ache in her muscles was nothing at all. The truth was that Earth was different from most habitable worlds. Most species in the galaxy evolved on small moons or low-gravity planets. They grew tall and thin, with delicate bones and efficient bodies that needed very little energy to move. Some, like the, had no solid form at all. Humans were the exception. Earth was a dense, heavy world with a thick atmosphere and strong gravity. Everything on Earth had evolved to fight against the constant pull of the planet. Trees grew thick trunks. Animals developed powerful muscles. And humans, the dominant species, had bodies that seemed crude and wasteful compared to the elegant forms of other intelligent beings. Human bones were thick and heavy. Human muscles consumed far more energy than they should. Human hearts had to pump blood that was dense and sluggish compared to the thin fluids that ran through alien bodies. When humans traveled to space, they needed special ships with stronger engines and more fuel. When they walked on alien stations, they moved like old people, slow and careful. The galaxy had decided long ago that humans were an evolutionary mistake. Interesting, perhaps, but ultimately unimportant. A species that had somehow managed to reach the stars despite every disadvantage, but would never be able to compete with more advanced civilizations. Reached the speaking platform and stood before the assembled council. She took a moment to catch her breath, which drew another wave of amused sounds from the audience. She did not let it show on her face. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she began. "The United Nations of Earth formally requests membership in the Defensive Pact." The laughter this time was not hidden. It echoed through the chamber like a physical force, stood still and waited for it to pass. High Counselor and raised one of his four arms for silence. His compound eyes studied with what might have been curiosity or contempt. It was hard to tell with the N. "Ambassador," he said, "the Defensive Pact exists to protect member species from external threats. It requires military contribution and strategic value. With respect, what could humanity possibly offer?" Had prepared for this question. She had practiced her answer many times, but standing there, feeling the weight of alien judgment pressing down on her as surely as Earth's gravity had pressed down on her ancestors, she found that her prepared words seemed empty. "We offer our strength," she said simply. More laughter. A representative spoke, its voice like breaking glass. "Your strength? Ambassador, we have seen your soldiers. They move as if walking through water. Your ships are slow and heavy. Your weapons are primitive. What strength do you speak of? Looked at the. It was beautiful in its way, a being of pure crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. It had probably never experienced true physical hardship in its entire existence. The strength that comes from surviving, said. The strength that comes from fighting gravity every moment of every day since the first fish crawled onto land 400 million years ago. The strength that comes from never giving up. They made a dismissive chiming sound. Pretty words, Ambassador, but words do not win wars. High Counselor and clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. We will consider your request, he said, in a tone that made it clear the consideration would be brief. In the meantime, if humanity wishes to contribute to galactic defense, we can assign you a patrol sector. Knew what that meant. A patrol sector was what the Council gave to species it wanted to keep busy without actually involving them in anything important. It was guard duty for empty space, watching over shipping lanes that no one cared about. We accept, she said. As she walked back through the chamber, she felt the eyes of 1,000 alien species watching her. She heard their laughter, felt their pity. She kept her back straight and her head high, even though both caused her muscles to ache. Behind her, the Council had already moved on to more important matters. Humanity was forgotten before she reached the door. Over the next 3 years, human ships patrolled their assigned sector. They did their job without complaint. They mapped asteroid fields and monitored traffic and responded to the occasional distress call. It was boring, thankless work, but they did it well. The Council barely noticed. When human officers attended galactic military conferences, they were seated in the back. When human ships docked at Council stations, they were given the worst berths. When human diplomats spoke, they were politely ignored. The humans never complained. They simply worked harder, trained longer, and waited for the day when their strength would be recognized. That day came sooner than anyone expected. Ambassador was in her quarters on the UNSS Endeavour when the alarm sounded. She was on her feet in seconds, moving toward the bridge with the heavy, determined stride that had become second nature. Report, she said as she entered. Captain looked up from his console. His face was pale. Ambassador, we're receiving emergency broadcasts from across the sector. The Dominion has invaded. Felt her blood run cold. They were the nightmare that kept galactic leaders awake at night. A hive-mind species from beyond the galaxy's edge, they had appeared 50 years ago and had been expanding ever since. They were fast, ruthless, and seemed to have no interest in diplomacy or trade. Where, she asked. Everywhere, said. They came through a wormhole that appeared out of nowhere. Prime is under attack. The home nebula has been infiltrated. We're getting reports of ships in a dozen systems. Looked at the tactical display. Red dots representing ships were spreading across the map like a disease. The blue dots representing Council forces were retreating on every front. The species that laughed at us, she said quietly, they're dying. Nodded grimly. The favor boarding actions. They send soldiers onto enemy ships and stations. Fast, brutal, overwhelming, the others. Their bodies aren't built for that kind of fighting. They are tearing them apart. Stared at the map for a long moment. Then she turned to the communications officer. Get me High Counselor in, she said. Tell him that humanity is ready to help. The officer hesitated. Ambassador, they've never taken us seriously before. Why would they listen now? Smiled, and there was something hard in her eyes. Because now they're falling, and we're the only ones who know how to stand up. They came like a storm. Their ships poured through the collapsed wormhole in numbers that belief. Wave after wave of dark vessels spread across the galaxy, each one carrying hundreds of soldiers bred for war. The hive mind that controlled them had calculated perfectly. The fractured Council species, each one proud and independent, would fall one by one. They were right. They were the first to break. Their crystal bodies, so beautiful in the Council chamber, shattered like glass under bombardment. Their cities, elegant spires of living crystal, collapsed into glittering rubble. Those who survived the initial attack tried to fight back, but their delicate forms were no match for soldiers in close combat. They fared no better. The gas giant dwellers had evolved in environments where physical strength was meaningless. Their intelligence and their ability to manipulate energy fields had made them one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. But they did not care about energy fields. They pumped toxic chemicals into this home nebula and watched the great beings disperse into the void, dying without ever understanding how to fight back. Species after species fell. The elegant, the refined, the evolved. They had spent millions of years developing their minds while their bodies grew weak. Now, facing enemies who fought with tooth and claw and raw physical force, they discovered that evolution had left them defenseless. The strategy was simple and effective. They would approach an enemy ship or station, breach the hull, and send soldiers inside. The soldiers were bred for speed and violence. They moved through corridors like shadows, killing everything in their path. In the zero gravity of space combat, they were almost impossible to stop. Station after station fell. The Council retreated from one system to another, trying to establish defensive lines that crumbled as soon as they were formed. High Counselor and sent increasingly desperate messages, begging member species to send reinforcements that did not exist. Then they reached the human patrol sector. The UNSS Persistence was an old ship. She had been built before humanity made first contact, designed to explore the outer reaches of Earth's solar system. When the galaxy opened up to humanity, she had been refitted for interstellar travel, but she still showed her age. Her hull was and patched. Her engines were loud and inefficient. To the elegant vessels of the Council fleet, she looked like a relic from a more primitive time. The boarding party that breached her hull expected the same easy slaughter they had found on every other ship. They had killed thousands of aliens in the past weeks, had shattered, had dissolved. The insect lichen had crumpled like paper. This would be no different. They were wrong. The first soldier through the breach stopped moving the moment it entered the ship. Its limbs, designed for lightning-fast movement in zero gravity, suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Its body, which had never known weight, was being pulled toward the floor by an invisible force. The Persistence maintained full Earth gravity throughout her interior. It was considered wasteful and strange by galactic standards. Other species reduced gravity on their ships to save energy and make movement easier. Humans did the opposite. They kept their ships heavy because it was what their bodies needed to stay strong. The soldier tried to move forward and fell. Its legs, evolved for zero gravity, buckled under the weight of its own body. Behind it, more soldiers pushed through the breach and suffered the same fate. They crashed to the deck in a tangled pile of limbs, struggling to rise against a force they had never experienced. Then the humans came. They moved through the corridors with the heavy, determined stride that had drawn laughter in the council chamber. But here, in this environment, that stride was not a weakness. It was power. Each step was solid and sure. Each movement was backed by muscles that had spent their entire existence fighting gravity. The soldiers, pinned to the deck by their own weight, could barely raise their weapons. The humans walked through them like farmers walking through a field of wheat. It was not a battle. It was a harvest. When it was over, Captain stood in the breached corridor, looking down at the bodies of the soldiers. His breathing was heavy, and there was blood on his hands, but none of it was his. "Send a message to High Counselor N," he said. "Tell him we found a way to fight back." Word spread through the hive mind faster than any message could travel through normal space. The collective consciousness that controlled billions of soldiers processed the information from the Persistence and reached a simple conclusion: avoid the heavy. But avoidance was not possible. The humans had received the Council's call for help, and they were coming. Human ships were slower than vessels. Their engines were louder and less efficient, but they were also tougher. Human engineers had built their ships to survive in an environment where even traveling to orbit was a fight against gravity. The hulls were thick and strong. The structures were reinforced and redundant. Where weapons would punch through the elegant shells of council ships with ease, they barely scratched human armor. The Battle of Station became the first major victory against the. A human task force arrived to find the station under siege, its crystalline defenders shattered and scattered. The fleet moved to intercept, confident in their ability to destroy these slow, primitive vessels. The human ships did not try to match the in speed or maneuverability. They simply advanced, taking hits that would have destroyed any other vessel and closed the distance. When they were close enough, they deployed boarding parties of their own. Human marines, wearing powered armor that would have crushed any other species, cut through ships like fire through ice. The soldiers, deadly in zero gravity, were helpless when the humans activated gravity generators and pinned them to the deck. Ship after ship fell to human boarding actions, and for the first time since the invasion began, the hive mind experienced something like fear. High Counselor and watched the battle reports with all four of his compound eyes. Beside him, his aide clicked nervously. "How is this possible?" the aide asked. "They are slow, they are primitive, everything we know about them suggests they should be at a disadvantage." And was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "We made a mistake," he said. "We saw their gravity as a chain that held them back. We thought they were weak because they struggled to move, to lift, to simply exist. We never considered that the struggle itself might make them strong." "But they are still just one species," the aide said. "They cannot fight the entire invasion alone." "No," and agreed. "But perhaps they do not have to. Perhaps they simply need to teach us how to fight." Ambassador received the invitation to the emergency council session 3 days later. When she arrived, the chamber was much emptier than before. Many of the platforms that had held delegates were dark and silent. The species that had sat there were gone, destroyed, or scattered by the invasion. But the species that remained watched her differently now. There was no laughter, there was no pity, there was only desperate hope. "Ambassador," High Counselor said, "the Council has reconsidered your request for membership in the Defensive Pact. We have also reconsidered our understanding of human capabilities." Stood before them, her back straight despite the ache it caused. "And what has the Council concluded?" "We conclude that we were fools," and said simply. "We looked at your species and saw only limitations. We never saw the strength that those limitations created. We laughed at your struggle without understanding that struggle is how strength is built. The Council formally requests human assistance in the war against the Dominion," he continued. "Not as a minor patrol species, not as comic relief, as leaders of the military effort, as the species best equipped to fight the enemy we face." Looked around the chamber. The who had mocked her were silent, their crystal bodies dimmed with grief for their lost. The had withdrawn entirely, their remaining population scattered across the galaxy. Even in himself seemed smaller somehow, his proud mandibles clicking with something that might have been shame. "We accept," she said. "But understand this, we will not fight your war for you. We will fight alongside you. We will teach you what we know. And when this is over, you will never laugh at us again." And bowed his head. "That is fair." As left the chamber, she allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had spent its entire existence fighting gravity, fighting to stand, fighting to climb, fighting to reach the stars that other species had reached with ease. Now the galaxy would learn what that fight had made them. The Battle of Prime became the turning point of the war. Not because of superior technology. The humans still used weapons that galactic engineers considered primitive, not because of greater numbers. Humanity had only a fraction of the population that they could bring to bear. The battle became a turning point because it demonstrated a simple truth that the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes, the species that suffers the most becomes the one that cannot be broken. and Prime was the last major stronghold of the insect-like species that had once ruled the Galactic Council. If it fell, the N would be destroyed as a civilization. High Counselor and himself had returned to his to lead the defense, though he knew that his soldiers could not hold against the coming assault. The fleet arrived on the third day of the second month of the war. 2,000 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a formation that covered half the sky. They had committed a significant portion of their total military strength to this attack, determined to crush one of the last centers of resistance. Waiting for them was a human fleet of 300 ships. "They outnumber us almost 7-1, observed Captain, now commanding the human forces from the bridge of the UNSS Defiance. Their analysts probably calculated that this would be enough to guarantee victory. General, the overall commander of human military forces in the sector, studied the tactical display with calm eyes. She was a stocky woman whose bones were dense as concrete, and whose heart pumped blood thick enough to function under acceleration that would drain lesser beings. She had spent 40 years in the military, and she had never lost a battle. "Their analysts," she said, "have never fought humans before." The space battle began with the attacking in their usual style, fast strikes designed to disable enemy vessels so boarding parties could finish the job. Their ships darted and weaved with a speed that no human vessel could match. Missiles and energy beams flashed through the void. The human ships did not try to dodge. They simply absorbed the punishment and kept coming. Weapons that would have gutted Council vessels bounced off human armor. Boarding pods, designed to crack open enemy hulls, crumpled against reinforced plates. "They're confused," reported. "They expected us to break by now. Their hive mind is trying to process why we're still fighting." "Good," said. "Confusion is the beginning of fear, and fear is the beginning of defeat. All units commence Operation Heavy Fall." The human launched from their carriers, not toward the fleet but toward Prime itself. They fell through the thin atmosphere of the alien world like meteors, their heat shields glowing orange and red against the dark sky. Inside, the human Marines sat in their powered armor, feeling the familiar pull of acceleration. For them, this was nothing. They had spent their whole lives under the heavy hand of Earth's gravity. A little extra force during atmospheric entry was barely noticeable. They had already landed ground forces on Prime. They had expected easy conquest. The Lin soldiers, like most Council species, had bodies designed for low-gravity environments. They were fast and agile but fragile. They had been slaughtering them for hours. Then the human hit the ground. The impact left craters. Any other species would have been killed by such a landing. But the humans rose from the smoking holes in the earth like ancient gods of war, their armor scorched but intact, their bodies bruised but unbroken. The commander on the ground, linked to the hive mind, processed this information and felt something that her species had never experienced before: pure, overwhelming terror. The humans advanced across the battlefield with the same heavy, determined stride that had drawn laughter in the council chamber. But there was nothing funny about them now. Each step shook the ground. Each movement carried the force of bodies built to survive under crushing gravity. The soldiers tried to run. They were faster than humans. They had always been faster, but speed meant nothing when the humans deployed their gravity generators. Portable devices, carried by human engineers, created zones of heavy gravity across the battlefield. Soldiers who entered these zones collapsed immediately, their bodies pinned to the ground by forces they had never evolved to resist. The battle became a hunt. General led her troops from the front, as she always did. Her powered armor made her even more powerful than she already was. She moved through the forces like a walking disaster, crushing enemies who could not even stand in her presence. At one point, she stopped and activated her communications system. The message was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching every ship in the fleet and every soldier on the ground. "This is General of the United Nations Space Command," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "You laughed at our weight, at our slowness, at the chains our own world wrapped around us. You thought we were weak because we struggled to do what other species do easily." She paused and looked around at the battlefield. Soldiers lay everywhere, crushed by gravity they could not resist. Human marines moved among them, securing prisoners and eliminating resistance. "We spent 10,000 generations learning to carry those chains," she continued. "Every human who has ever lived has fought against gravity from the moment they were born. We learned to walk while being pushed into the ground. We learned to run while being held back. We learned to jump while being pulled down. Now you get to feel those chains, and you will learn what we learned. Gravity is not a weakness. Gravity is a teacher, and it taught us to be strong." The fleet in orbit received the message and calculated their options. They could continue the battle and lose more ships to an enemy that refused to break. Or they could retreat and regroup, hopping to find a strategy that worked against these impossible creatures. They chose retreat. It was the first time in the history of the Dominion that they had voluntarily withdrawn from a battle. The hive mind that controlled them spent days processing the experience, trying to understand how a species so slow and primitive could have defeated them so completely. They never found an answer. The war lasted another 2 years. The humans did not fight alone. They trained soldiers from other species, teaching them how to use gravity as a weapon. They designed new armor and new tactics that took advantage of human strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. They built a coalition of species that had been enemies before but were united by the common threat. In the end, the Dominion was pushed back to the wormhole they had come through. Human engineers, working with the best minds from a dozen species, found a way to collapse the wormhole permanently. They were sealed away, their invasion over. The Galactic Council reconvened for the first time since the war began. The chamber was even emptier than before. Many platforms stood dark and abandoned, memorials to species that had been destroyed before humanity could save them. Ambassador entered the chamber with the same heavy stride she had always had. But now, no one laughed. No one. The surviving delegates watched her with respect that bordered on awe. High Counselor and stood to greet her. His body bore scars from the battle of his, but he stood tall. "Ambassador," he said, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I extend our deepest gratitude. Humanity has saved us all." Looked around the chamber. The survivors, their crystal bodies dimmed but still beautiful. The scattered, slowly returning to their home nebula. The dozens of species that had survived because humans had fought for them. "We did not save you," she said. "We saved ourselves. We simply brought you along for the journey." "Regardless," and said, "the Council wishes to honor humanity. We offer you a permanent seat on the High Council. We offer you leadership of the Reformed Defensive Pact. We offer you whatever you wish to ask." Was quiet for a moment, then she smiled. "We ask only one thing," she said. "Remember what you learned. Strength does not come from being born without challenges. Strength comes from facing challenges and overcoming them. The species that struggle are the species that grow. The species that have everything given to them remain weak." "We will remember," and promised. As left the chamber, she passed by a window that looked out into space. Stars gleamed in the darkness, each one a sun with its own planets, its own life, its own struggles. Somewhere out there, other species were evolving, learning, growing. Some would be like the born into gentle environments that made life easy. Others would be like humans, shaped by harsh conditions that forced them to become strong. She thought about Earth, that dense, heavy world that had tried to crush her ancestors for billions of years. Every creature that had ever lived on Earth had fought against gravity from the moment of its birth. Every plant, every animal, every human had spent its entire existence pushing back against the force that tried to keep it down. And they had won, not once but again and again, generation after generation. They had learned to stand. They had learned to walk. They had learned to run and jump and climb. They had learned to build towers and fly through the air and eventually reach the stars themselves. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It was an old human saying, so old that no one remembered who had first spoken it. But it was true. It had always been true. Earth's gravity had tried to kill humanity for 4 billion years. It had failed. And now the galaxy knew what that failure had created. A species that could not be crushed, could not be broken, could not be defeated. A species that had learned to carry chains and had become unbreakable in the process. Ambassador smiled and walked on, her footsteps heavy and sure. Behind her, the stars continued to shine, and the universe continued to turn, and humanity continued to stand. Always standing, always rising, always reaching for something higher. That was what gravity had taught them. That was what made them human.